guys! I read so many things in June, it's actually insane. I read 18 things, 6 of which were novellas, but like still, considering I've been in a reading slump since basically the end of last year, the fact that I'm back to reading and back to reading in that volume is crazy. I don't think I've ever read that much in a month, ever, like in my life. I was basically just like inhaling books, and I have no problem with that. Out of those 18 books, I did have 2 DNFs and, like I said, 6 novellas, and I read some of my favorite books of the year, which is not surprising considering just like the numbers game of it, reading basically, oh my gosh, so I've read 40 books since the start of this year, and 18 of those were in the last month. So that's like half of my reading for the year. It's no wonder that I found a few of my favorite books of the year in this last month. So I'm just gonna start talking about books, otherwise we're gonna be here forever. First off, I finished the Brothers Sinister series from Courtney Milan. That included the Heiress Effect, the Countess Conspiracy, the Suffragette Scandal, and Talk Sweetly to Me. The first 3 were books 2 through 4 of the series, and then the last one was a novella. And I loved all of these. Basically, Courtney Milan can do no wrong. She is so incredible at making well-developed books and storylines and plot lines and characters while also having like an accurate historical time period, or maybe not fully accurate, but it feels very immersive, and also a really just sweet and touching romance in every single one of them. They're so adorable. But there's always also another extra layer to the book, so it's not just about the romance, there's always something else happening, there's some other commentary on some sort of social issue, and it's done so well. They're genuinely well-written books and extremely enjoyable. The Heiress Effect is about an heiress who purposely acts like the most obnoxious person ever in high society in order to deter people from trying to marry her. The Countess Conspiracy is about a woman who is actually a scientist, but because she's a woman in this time period, society doesn't allow her to own up to her work and publish her work, so she publishes her work through her childhood friend. The Suffragette Scandal is about a woman who is fighting for the right for women to vote and also trying to keep hold of her newspaper company. And Talk Sweetly to Me is about a black woman and the Irish man who is trying to make her fall in love with him. All of these were incredible. I cried basically every one, which is so unexpected. I did not go into historical romance expecting to cry, and yet every single one made me cry, except maybe the novella. I can't remember. No, I probably still cried at that one too. There's just so much to each of these books, and I really love them. I honestly could not have started in a better place with historical romance. I ended up picking up a few more authors later on in the month that also write historical romance, and still Courtney Milan is my favorite one. She is so good. Speaking of other authors, I picked up The Dukan Diet by Julia Quinn, which is the first book in the Bridgerton series, and I ended up DNFing this one. It's a romance between a duke with a speech impediment and a girl who's part of a huge family. And while I really enjoyed it, I really liked the atmosphere, the setting, and the characters, there were just certain plot points that made me not want to continue the story. I actually read most of this book. I think I DNF'd it at like 75%. And that was just because I was already pushing through so many plot points that I really didn't like. And once it finally hit that one thing, I just like, no, I'm done with this. I don't even want to finish it. I thought the characters were really well done. The setting and the writing were really great, but just certain aspects of the romance were too much for me. There's parts with like fist fights and like duels to the death that I think are just really overdramatic and just kind of cringy. Like 2 guys getting in a fist fight over a girl is just a little bit not my thing. And then there was a whole thing with like forced pregnancy that was where I stopped because I don't want to deal with it. So unfortunately, I will not be reading the Bridgerton series. It just has some elements that are not going to be for me. But I know a lot of people really like that series and really like Julia Quinn, so maybe it'll work for you. I actually knew about these plot points before going into the book, and I thought they wouldn't bother me, but they ended up really bothering me, so I couldn't finish it, unfortunately. The next book I finished was The Wicked Fox by Kat Cho, so taking a little bit of a break from romance. This is a Korean-inspired fantasy about a 9-tailed fox called a gumiho, and she ends up losing her fox speed and has to try and find a way to put it back in her body. When I heard the plot synopsis for this book, for some reason I thought it was like a traveling story, like she actually lost it out in the world and she had to go find it. That's not the case. She loses her fox speed in the sense that like it comes out of her body when it's supposed to be in her body, so she's carrying it around in her pocket and she's just trying to find a way to put it back in her body. It's not like you have to go on some adventure to go find the fox speed. Like, I was thinking something like Inuyasha, where the pearl shatters or something, and you have to like search through the land to get the different shards of it. It's not like that at all. It's very much a sedentary book. You just stay in Seoul the whole time, which was really cool because I've never read a book in Seoul. Actually, the reason I picked up this book in the first place was because I had just finished watching my first K-drama ever, and I was craving more things set in Seoul in Korea. So there was that. The K-drama I watched was Crash Landing on You, by the way. It's so good. My mom and my whole family on that side is obsessed with it. It's actually insane. My grandmother is obsessed with that guy. It's hilarious. But the show was really, really good. Anyway, that's what made me want to pick up this book much faster than I was anticipating. But back to the book itself, Wicked Fox. This is a YA book, which is kind of where I have my sort of disappointments with it. I still really enjoyed it. It was a very interesting story and I liked seeing the Korean culture a lot, but I felt like some of the characters and some of the plot points were a little bit too not nuanced enough for me. Everything was very like flat and straightforward, I feel. And I know part of that has to do with it being based on like the K-drama sort of formula. And because I'm not really familiar with K-dramas, again, I just finished my first one and I haven't actually watched another one. So I've only watched one K-drama in my life, so I'm not really familiar with the different tropes and the different like plot beats. So I can't really recognize it. And maybe if you're more familiar with that sort of genre, then you would be able to see it more and be able to understand the story more because you know like what you're getting into. But because I have no familiarity with it, the story just felt a little bit flat for me. I appreciated the family dynamics. There's a lot of really complicated family dynamics in this book, but at the same time, I don't think it went as deep as it could have. So while I enjoyed my time with this book, it's not something that I really feel like I need to go back to and finish the second book. I think the second book in the series, it's a duology, comes out this year, which is exciting. If you want to pick it up now, you can read them both really quickly back to back. But I don't think I care enough about the characters or the storyline to pick up that book. Also, this story ended in like a pretty solid place, so I don't even know really where the story is gonna go from there, and I'm not really that interested to find out. Oh no! Why? That was so fast this time. Okay, after a short Chinese food break later, I'm back. I think because it's summer now and it's getting warm, my light is overheating so quickly now, and that's really annoying. So the next book I finished was The Queen of Sorrow by Sarah Beth Durst. This is the third and final book in the Queens of Renthia series, which is about a land called Renthia where everything in the land is tied to spirits, and the spirits hate humans. They try to kill humans at every possible point. The only thing that's stopping them from killing everyone is the power of the queen. Since it is the third book in the series, I can't go much into what it's about, but I was pretty disappointed with it. I loved the first book a lot. I loved exploring the world and learning more about it, and I thought the characters were really interesting. But the second book kind of let me down a little bit, and the third book even more so. I still really enjoy this world. It's a lot of fun, and there's a lot of characters that I really like and a lot of relationships I really like. But my main problem is nothing really feels real in this world. There are no consequences to some of the actions that these characters take. No one questions anything really, and it feels like it's all taking place in this little bubble, like within the castle, within the power of this land, but then it's also supposed to be full of all of these different people. And the whole point of the series is that the spirits are attacking people and killing people out in the land, and it's the queen's job to stop them. But when it doesn't really feel like you're getting any input from any of the people out living in the land, it feels like an isolated bubble that doesn't really make any sense as a power structure for this land. There are things that happen within this castle that I feel like someone outside of it should be questioning and should have some sort of voice to speak up about it, but that just never happens. And even like within the castle, there are people who might be like slightly outside of the sort of power group, but they're like guards or something, or courtiers or something, and they should be able to say like, oh, what the heck happened here? Like, is someone going to explain this to me? But they just don't. And it's so weird because it feels like nothing really has true consequence, and then all of the effects of your actions don't really play out in these characters' minds at all. It's like they commit one sort of crime and then they never think about it again, and it's so weird, it doesn't feel real. So while the plot is really interesting, the characters are really interesting, the world is really interesting, it's just, it doesn't feel like any of the actions have any consequences, and that kind of ruins the immersion. It is a really fun series. If you want something really light and with some pretty cool world building, then I would recommend it, but otherwise I was a little bit disappointed. And then probably my biggest surprise of the month, my biggest surprise of the year, was Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. I had never considered myself to be someone who would ever read Jane Austen. I thought she was too old and too stuffy, and like anything she writes would be either really hard to read or really boring, and I was so wrong. There have been a lot of people on BookTube recently that have been going back and reading a bunch of Jane Austen, so it kind of got me more interested in trying her. So of course I started with the most popular one, As You Do, and I loved it. I don't know how I went my entire life without being spoiled for any of the story, but I wasn't. And I'm sure I don't need to tell you what Pride and Prejudice is about, though thinking about it, I never knew what it was about. So maybe I do. But at the same time, how do you explain it? It's kind of like high-class English drama. And I guess the reason that I picked it up in the first place was because I've been reading a bunch of historical romance set in that time that Jane Austen was writing. And also it had come up as references in some of the books I was reading. So I was like, you know what, maybe I should just read it. And I did, and I loved it. And actually after I finished it, I made my boyfriend watch the BBC adaptation with me, and he really loved it too. So it's just incredible. And honestly, I really shouldn't be surprised because it's just this huge thing that's been around for literal centuries. So I don't know why it's so shocking that I actually liked it, but I really did. And now I want to read more Jane Austen. Next, I read Romancing the Duke by Tessa. This is another historical romance. I was trying out a new author, and this is about a duke who was injured and he's been hiding away from society for the last 6 months, and his castle ends up being sold to a girl who's not in the best financial position at the time, and it's their romance and them rebuilding this castle and figuring each other out. I enjoyed this. It was really fun and easy to read, but it didn't have the depth that the Courtney Milan books have. It's much more like surface level romance rather than being something really intricate with the plot. There were other things in the plot, but not to the level that Courtney Milan had them. And unfortunately, because I read them so quickly, I am going to be comparing between the two. I think Courtney Milan's writing style is a little bit better for me, whereas Tessa tends to be more on the simple side. I found that when I was reading this book, it didn't really register that it was in this Regency time period. I think it wasn't really emphasized as much as it was in the Brother Sinister books. So at times it just felt like a modern romance that could have happened at any time, and I didn't get the same feeling of it being historical, other than the fact that like he's a duke and women have no power. So it was kind of missing that historical element for me, which I really enjoy. So while it was fun, it wasn't my favorite. I wasn't quite ready to give up on Tessa yet, so I tried the Scandalous, Dissolute, No Good Mr. Wright, which is a novella. And honestly, I can't remember what it was about. I think that was the one about the girl who's not allowed out into society until all of her previous sisters were married, and she ends up getting involved with an older guy who's supposedly a rake, and it's their love story over time. I thought it was okay. It definitely wasn't really memorable, obviously. So again, something quick and fun and short, but not really something that touched me very much. I picked up another novella, this time by Alyssa Cole, and that was Agnes Moore's Wild Night, and this is about a black woman who's part of King someone's court, and her romance with a Scottish Highlander. This one's set in like the 11th century, so it's not the Regency era historical that I've been reading, and it was really good. I have not read any Alyssa Cole before. I'm definitely interested in reading more from her, but I thought this one was really well written. I obviously don't have a good enough feel of her as an author from a short novella, but I am planning to read a couple books from her, and we'll see what my opinion of her is after those. But this novella was a lot of fun, short, easy, steamy, and it definitely got me more interested in Scottish romance. The next book I finished was A Closed and Common Orbit by Becky Chambers. This is the second book in the Wayfarer series, which is a very slow-moving, character-focused space opera, and I loved this book. It follows some of the characters from the first book, and while they don't really directly follow, the things that happen in this book will definitely spoil some of the first book. While I liked The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, I absolutely loved A Closed and Common Orbit. I think the topics that it deals with and the way that it's written made me connect to it much more. There's only 2 points of view versus the I don't remember how many in the first book. So it's much more contained and much more personal of a story, and I think that worked really well. I feel like one of the problems with the first book that I had with it was that some of its moral messages were a little bit heavy-handed, whereas with this one it felt much more seamlessly integrated into the story and much more natural, which I really appreciated. And the fact that you're seeing these two characters as they're kind of growing up and developing who they are as more of like a discovering yourself story worked much better for me than the kind of episodic nature of the first one. I really appreciated all of the topics that this book went into. I loved the representation, and it was just so interesting and so much fun. Maybe it's because this book had more of a plot than the first one. Still not like much of one, but definitely more than what the first book had, I think. Either way, I love this book. It was so good, and I have no faults with it. Next, I tried another Tessa Dare with the Duchess Steele, and I ended up DNFing this one. I don't remember what it was about. Oh, I think the Duke goes and finds a random seamstress to be his Duchess and picks her up basically off of the street. I think that's the right one. Either way, I really didn't care about the story or the characters enough to keep going, so I just decided to DNF it. Again, I'm having a problem with Tessa Dare and her writing style as well as her setup of the setting, because one of the aspects I really like about historical romance is the historical part of it, and I don't really get much of that. There's like a little sprinkling of it in those Tessa Dare books, but not really to the point that I enjoyed or that I got from Courtney Milan. So I just decided that Tessa Dare isn't really going to be an author for me. I've tried a bunch of her books now, and they haven't really been impressive to me. That being said, I still read another book from her. I read When Scot Ties the Knot, which, like I said before, I was interested in Scottish romance, and this is that. I think the characters in this were slightly more interesting. It's about a girl who makes up a sort of pretend Scottish lover, and she writes letters for like a decade to this random person who doesn't exist. And she uses that as her excuse to not have to go out into society because she gets really anxious around people. And then when she ends up moving to Scotland because her grandfather or godfather left her a castle in Scotland, the man with the same name as her imaginary lover shows up at her door and demands to marry her. I liked both of these characters a lot more than I liked some of the other ones in the Tessa Dare books, so that kept me intrigued, and also the Scottish aspect of it kept me intrigued. Again, I don't really feel much from the setting of her books. They aren't as vivid as I would like them to be, but they're still really fun and really easy to get through, so I finished that book, and I will not be picking up any more Tessa Dare from here. Not because I hate her, but her books just aren't really for me. Next, I binged the rest of the Tensert series by J.Y. Yang. That's the Red Threads of Fortune, the Descent of Monsters, and the Ascent to Godhood. This is an Asian-inspired fantasy that is kind of steampunky and kind of really dark, and each of these novellas is told in a different narrative structure. So the first novella, The Black Tides of Heaven, that was told as little vignettes over time as this one person grows up. The second novella is much more of a typical narrative structure following one character in a short period of time. The third one is told more as a detective case. So they give you the case materials and transcripts of interviews and write-ups from the people who go and explore the crime scene. And the fourth one is told from the perspective of someone who's basically sitting in a bar and telling their life story to someone. So all of these books were really unique, and all these books are related in their storyline and sort of the characters and the overall plot of the world, but they don't follow the same character through all 4 books. All of the characters reappear in each other's books. It's really kind of confusing, but also not. It's not a very straightforward way to tell the story. Again, like I said, the narrative structure changes between the different novellas, so it's really very interesting and unique. And while I liked all of them, the Red Threads of Fortune, the second one, is definitely my favorite. It's a storyline that I connected much more to, maybe because it's like the most straightforward, like typical writing style of all of them. but I actually really connected to the main character more in that one, the perspective character in that one, and I appreciated the way that the story handles grief and loss of loved one. There was a bit of insta-love that I wasn't really a fan of, but overall the plot was really gripping and the expansion of the world was really fun to see. Descent of Monsters was very dark. It gets into some really intense things, and just the sort of detective style of the narrative didn't really work well for me. I don't really care for police drama or anything, so it was probably my least favorite of the series, but it's also very important for like plot developments. And it gets very, very intense. I really liked Ascent to Godhood because you get to learn more about the backstory of the Protector and how she came to be who she is. So that was really fun to learn about, and I feel like after all of these books, they're kind of building up to something that's going to be the main plot for the full-length novel that this author is writing in this series. I don't know when that's going to come out, but I think they're working on it right now. Whenever it comes out though, I am excited to read it, if a little bit scared, just because of how intense it is. And then the last book that I finished in June, Dune by Frank Herbert, finally. I've been reading this since March. It's crazy. I was reading this with my boyfriend. We were reading it at the same time. This is his copy actually, so it has his bookmark where he DNF'd it at this point. I don't blame him. I did not really end up liking this. This is a classic sci-fi about a boy who's basically a prodigy god and how he deals with this really inhospitable land called Dune, where everything is desert, there is no water, and there are giant worms that will come and eat you alive. I really don't get along with this writing style. I think that Frank Herbert has a very weird way of describing things, and his pacing is so weird. There are really long stretches of the book where literally the only thing that physically happens is they pack up a tent in like 10 pages. And most of the page time is just dedicated to whatever they're internally thinking, or times when someone's having a conversation with someone else and they're second guessing everything the other person says. And because you can see all of these characters' thoughts at the same time, you'll have one person say something and then they'll be thinking about, oh, but I actually really mean this. And then you'll go to the other person and they'll be thinking, oh, but are they really lying to me? And then they'll say their response. And then you're back in the other person saying like, oh, I think they're lying to me. And it's a mess. It's a mess and it's so long. And then when action actually happens, it happens in like 2 pages and it's over, and I don't get it. There was a whole like battle sequence at the end that I didn't even understand it. I didn't know what was happening. I had no idea. Plus there are just some really weird descriptions in here that I just don't get along with. So in addition to the writing style being something that I don't really like, I didn't like the characters either. Paul was so freaking annoying. Everything came so easily to him. It was like he was never really in any danger because he's just like this overpowered god. And I was never really worried about him. I never felt like he was ever going to not make it out alive and not like win whatever stupid battle of wills they were coming up against. And he was like 15 and he doesn't act like he's 15. And then there's the whole thing with like his sister that was this book. There is also a lot of fat phobia in here, so much, and it was just disturbing to read. I think the only positive thing I liked about this book was the world and the world building, but even that didn't make any sense. Like, I don't understand any of the political stuff that happened here, and I'm just so confused. I don't get it, and I didn't like it. I realize it's a really influential book, and it changed a lot of things in the sci-fi genre, but as a reader today, it's not something that I was impressed with. I'm not a sci-fi reader in general, so maybe that's it, but also I think it's just the writing of this book. I really just didn't like it. And the plot. And the characters. So literally everything. I'm sorry. I know a lot of people like this book. I'm sorry. My dad is one of them. He loves it. It's his favorite thing, and I don't get it. I am glad it's finally done though. Along with this video that was so long, I had to take so many breaks because of technical difficulties, but I hope you enjoyed it. There were a lot of books here. Let me know if you've read any of these. Let me know your thoughts on them. If you disagree on Dune, if you have more historical romance for me, I would love to know. And I am really hoping I can keep up this momentum that I've been having. It's crazy how many books I went through. I still can't even believe it. So let me know how your reading's going, what your plans for the summer are, and I will see you later. Bye.